I have no regrets about everything that's happened except one. I regret that Mustaine, like for years, would go on stage and call me a liar.
Mm-hmm.
I never really thought much about it, but then I did the math and I realized that's why things were so hard for me to try and get deals or even get, like I walked into Carbon one day and I thought, you know what, these guitars aren't bad. I want to talk to their A&R guy.
Right.
So I spoke to the guy and he goes, dude, we don't use people like you on our roster.
The David Ellefson Show. Featuring Grammy Award winner David Ellefson and respected metal journalist Joshua Toomey. Presented by EllefsonEmporium.com. Here's David and Joshua.
Hey everybody, David Ellefson here. Welcome to the David Ellefson Show with my co-host Joshua Toomey.
Hello, David.
And today we got a really fun one coming your way with my longtime friend and prior bandmate, and even now sometimes bandmate, guitar
Right.
player Chris Poland. Probably one of the more coveted musicians of any genre, of any music style. Chris is a guy that everybody loves. They love to hear him play. It's kind of a mystery how he plays, because how does that guy get that sound out of that guitar? Yet, Chris isn't always, he's not out pounding the promotion circuits and doing that kind of stuff. So you kind of can't always get to Chris. And he was
Right.
kind enough to come on the podcast today. We've got a new Kings of Thrash song that just came out called Lockdown, and we just shot a video for it last month in LA. So we're super stoked to have that come out. That's on Cleopatra Records. So that just came out on Friday, May 16th. So that's available everywhere on YouTube and all the streaming platforms and everything. So we've got some tour dates coming up here in September and October. So Chris will be joining us for the Whiskey A Go-Go show on September 4th. So come and check that out. So, good deep dive here.
Yeah, this was a fun one, man. This is one of those episodes where, the comment section is going to go crazy. Like, what is the point of the Joshua guy? Where did this Joshua guy come from? And I get it. Like, I'm right there with you half the time. Comment section when it's like, why am I here? But this is like one of those why am I here moments. I'm like, it's David and it's Chris, and they're talking about the old days, and I'm just sitting back listening, like, getting firsthand. It's like my own personal favorite podcast. When that happens, when you and a friend kind of just go off the deep end, and what am I going to add to
me and Frank Bello or me and Chris Poland?
Right.
But let me speak to that, because you're a good soul, and thank you for your patience and just being kind. I invited you on the show, and this was your idea to podcast back in. And I said, hey, if I'm going in, I'm bringing my friends with me. That's just kind of how I am. It's like that when I start bands, when I start a company. I like the support. In my opinion, a good number one hires an even better 2 and 3 around him to pull me up to where you are. Because you're a podcast expert. I've done a few. I'm usually a guest on them. So for me to sort of be the anchor and the host, I think of like the Howard Stern show. Like, he's got Robin, he's got Craig Gass, he's got all these different guys.
The gang.
And when in the 90s when Megadeth,
kind of like the Beetlejuice of the show.
Well, when I remember doing a lot of morning radio in the 90s, as we had hit records that were radio favorites. You go in and you do the morning shows, and it's like this whole cast of characters. Mm-hmm. They all have a different role. Even KUPD here in town, their morning shows. You kind of bounce things off of each other. So we probably get more of an opportunity to do that going into the guest and coming out of the guest segment. During the guest, some of them, quite honestly, like you brought a lot of the guests on this show. So first of all, as a good bass player, you're the quiet guy behind the scenes. Well,
it's funny when we actually recorded the Chris Poland interview. Chris and I were on a few minutes before you jumped on. So he was kind of talking about back in the day, and I bring it up in the interview, but he goes, he's like, we were all assholes and we were all drunk. So we would send David to to be the face of the band and go deal with people because we were all drunk assholes.
Yeah. Send the nice kid from Minnesota out there. Yeah.
Right.
Win them over. Yeah. Which is true. I mean, it really is true. Funny, I can see pictures, especially of Chris, and I can tell which day the heroin showed up. Which day the heroin didn't show up and we were drinking, because Chris would have this kind of, this stern look on his face. Is like, oh, that was the day the heroin showed up. And then there's other days when he's all happy and smiling. Go, yep, that's the day the heroin didn't show up and we were drinking because that's all we had. So I can usually tell where we were, what we were doing, and what drug we were on by just looking at Chris. So anyway, and then fast forward, Chris got, when he's out of Megadeth, he was the first one to get sober. I mean, legitimately got clean. It was a trend, I guess, back in the day, but he really got clean. I mean, he made the turn. I remember going and hanging out with him down in Marina Del Rey at, might have been his girlfriend's apartment or something. We were all hanging out, watching TV, and I was turning the corner. I wasn't quite there yet. And I'm just going, man, if Chris Poland could get sober, I can get clean, and he was a real friend to me and a real brother to me, during that. So I owe a lot of that, of his lifestyle changes really, was a great example for me. So it's great now when we get together and we play in Kings of Thrash and do stuff, we not only have some laughs about the old days, because nobody's bitter about it. We've all moved on from it. We have some good laughs. Yeah. And it's just nice to know I got another sober brother there, we've walked a mile together and that's a different friendship when you've done that, because lots of times in bands, I was talking to Jimmy DeGrasso about this too. He goes, often it's weird with bands. You're not in a band with somebody. Sometimes you don't even talk to those people ever again, like ever, right. Yeah. Except suddenly you run into somebody backstage at a festival. You're like, oh, hey dude. Yeah, I haven't talked to you in 10 years. How you been? Oh, your kids are grown. Oh, now you're in that band, or you got out of the music business and now you sell real estate or whatever. It's like you just go separate ways, and it's not like you're mad at anybody. It's not, provided there's no money or royalties or other those issues. Sometimes it's just, that was then. Next, and you just right. Move on. So it's nice with Chris. After all these years, he and I and Jeff Young and. You have Chuck Beeler. I mean, and really Petrelli, Sean Drover, pretty much everybody I've stayed in touch with. These are my friends. They're my brothers. We certainly have some laughs over some of the stuff that we went through while being in the band. That's kind of our link to each other, but it's not the reason we're still friends. We've sort of created new memories, new chapters, and especially with Chris Poland, we've got a lot of new musical partnership together, so it's really been great,
the one thing we didn't touch on in the interview, and I'm kind of glad we didn't, because it was kind of a, it's a fun interview, but we didn't talk about Nick Menza's passing. Obviously Chris was there for that. And then, it's in the movie. I watched the documentary the other day and then, that's gotta be tough. I do love that Chris was talking about how in the doc, and he said it other places too, that Nick was on fire. He was crushing that day. Right, tempos were up, and it was just like all around a positive experience. And then all of a sudden, just dead. Like that's a crazy way to go. I didn't really want to bring it up towards the end of the interview or anything like that, but it kind of obviously everybody can see once the Nick Menza doc comes out, but. Yeah, that's just got to be tough. That's going to be tough just to kind of know that, your brother passes away on stage or whatever,
Well, yeah, I guess the mood of the interview didn't go there, because you can tell in the movie it's a very touching and heavy for Chris. I think, look, I was there when my mom died. I was there right up until the final minutes when my brother died, even though I wasn't, unfortunately, there at the exact moment that he passed. But, when you've been around people passing, there's two things that I think are really critical in life. The day your kids are born, to see that, like, oh my God, that's life. You know what I mean? They're right. And they look, just because they came out of the womb that day, they've already been alive for almost 9-10 months anyway. But, to see life just like there it is. And then when you're there, when someone passes, you realize, the stuff that we put the importance on versus the stuff that really just doesn't matter. You know what I mean? And we're only human, and so we all go through it. But I remember, there was a moment, I think for me, probably with my, Christian Lutheran faith and sobriety and stuff, when I just kind of was like, how bad can it be? If we always talk about how great heaven is, why are we so afraid to go there? And if there isn't a heaven, oh, well, we're just dead in a box anyway, right? So, so it's almost like wasn't afraid to die anymore. And it's funny, and when you're not afraid to die, you're not afraid to live, you know? And I think when people go, God, David, you're involved in so many things. It's like, why not? It's like, why be afraid to live, you know? And your past doesn't have to define you, good, bad, or otherwise. And, you know, so I think, you know, when I revisit that whole thing with Nick Menza dying, and I wasn't there when it happened, but it's very clear to me as I hear and see in the movie everybody's account, those that were there and were around it, you know, he was ready to go. He intuitively kind of knew, and he didn't know probably he's going to die, of course, but he just kind of was, it sounded like even through his son, Nicholas, he was totally at peace with everything. He was really at peace. And it's interesting how it's almost like the good Lord was prepping him and preparing him to just pluck him off the planet, you know, and when his heart gave out or whatever the, you know, the final thing was of his, you know, of his cause of death, he was like, that was it. He was gone. His soul probably left his body before he even hit the hi-hat. You know what I mean? Like before he was gone. And I know they tried to revive him and they got a bit of a pulse and they took him to the hospital, but he wasn't meant to come back. You know, like that was it for him. He was meant to leave. And, you know, knowing Nick, as many of us did, you know, for him to die on stage behind the drum kit, like what a better place to go, you know. Chris Adler even says it in the movie, you know, what a terrible thing to happen. Well, maybe that's the best thing to happen, you know what I mean? Like maybe that's the best place to go. So, you know, I guess, look, kick ass, rock out, play your drums or your guitar until the day the Lord takes you from the planet and whatever, you know. So it's, you know, to me, it's kind of like, whenever somebody calls to do something, it's like, hell yeah, like go, you know, just go do it. And, you know, so, yeah, Chris has had a very colorful career, you know, from Megadeth to the Circle Jerks to his own solo stuff and, Ohm and all this different stuff. So, yeah, let's dive into it, man. Let's chat to Chris. Let's do it. Good. Hey, just want to give a shout out to Non-Heinous, who did our awesome skull artwork, which is kind of mascots that we have here for the David Ellefson show. So, Josh, thanks for bringing him over. You've got his Instagram handle, right? Because you can get some discounts if bands or people want to use him for stuff, for merch, right?
Yeah, head over to Non-Heinous on Instagram, NonHeinous on Instagram. Let him know that the David Ellefson show sent you. He'll give you 15% off if you need art for your podcast, your merch, your album, all that great stuff. And you know, it's not you know, he'll work with you the entire way through. He sends you like actual hand-drawn sketches. You know, what do you like about this? Do you like that? You know, it's not AI, it's not a bunch of nonsense. Like he actually is an artist and he's doing some great stuff out there. He's done stuff for my podcast, he's done stuff now for the David Ellefson show, and just a cool dude, man. And you know, if you go check him out, just go follow him on Instagram because you'll enjoy all of his art that he puts up daily over there too. So he's a good dude, and support the art.
Just like forming Vic Rattlehead, a sketch
there you go.
beginning to a final mascot. So cool. Thanks, Non-Heinous. We appreciate you, brother. So yeah, go check him out. Well, hey, welcome to the David Ellefson show with my co-host Joshua Toomey here, and today. Longtime friend and musical partner for over many years and on many things, Chris Poland. Welcome to our show, dude.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So it's funny. We've got, I was thinking about just a little while ago. You and I have probably done more musical stuff together in the last bunch of years. You know, we were in Megadeth. Obviously, that was, you know, famous years for us. And, you know, who would have known? I mean, because as we both know, that could have easily just gone right off the frickin' cliff into complete destruction at any given moment. And yet somehow it, you know, you and I have an album, in particular, Peace Sells, that always gets voted like, you know, top, you know, heavy metal thrash, greatest album ever by Rolling Stone and all these guys. And, you know, who would have thought, right? I mean, who would have thought that? Even though we knew we were onto something pretty cool, who would have thought, right? But, you know, in recent years, you know, we've done, you know, not only Kings of Thrash and all that stuff. One of the things I was thinking about was kind of around the Nick Menza movie, which thank you for kindly appearing in that and telling that story. But remember when we played, it was in 2005, I think, 4 or 5. David just put Megadeth back together. Nick was kind of in and then he was out. And then your Ohm and F5, my band, we were playing together with that. There was a Megadeth tribute band called Hangar 18, right? Remember, it was down on Melrose and we invited Nick out and we got up and the three of us played, I don't know, we played Wake Up Dead and Peace Cells or something like that. And, it's just funny how the sort of axis of how that came together. And then Nick would play with you years later, so I don't know. Give me your thoughts on the whole life as we know it, life after death, life with death, all the rest of that.
Well, you know what? There's a lot going on with Nick Menza right now. Besides the movie, John Goodman, Gumby, is making like a full album that Max Norman's mixing, and I've been doing solos. I was just telling Josh that I've been doing solos for it, and it's really good, man. I mean, it's Nick, and it's tracks recorded over the last 30 years. Just that some were recorded at Sound City, some were recorded, by Gumby at his home studio.
Right.
And it is pretty rock.
So, it's funny because when we started doing the putting the film together. This is about 3 years ago. I was brought in, to kind of, Brady's guys brought in to narrate it. And then I just realized, okay, there's a lot of pieces laying around. We need to pick these up and put this together as one. And Gumby, who also he was our guitar tech while Nick was our drum tech on the So Far So Good So What tour. And John's fantastic guitar player, super creative guy. We were talking about that very thing because one day I had one of Nick's tracks in the studio here in Phoenix, and I asked John, who was engineering, I said, "Hey, throw up that Menza track." And it was just kind of a groove, like a Hangar 18 kind of groove. And I just took his Les Paul, I plugged it into a fractal, and just started crushing out some Judas Priest kind of riffs over it, And I thought, fucking hey, we could totally write a whole bunch of songs with Nick, basically using his existing drum tracks. And we did a bunch. There's going to be a couple that are going to be on the Blu-ray DVD that comes out with the movie. So at least we got a couple of them on there. But I'm glad to hear that Gumby's doing that because it seems like there was I was surprised how prolific Nick was after he was in Megadeth. I had no idea how much stuff he had done.
Yeah. But that's the first I've heard of you guys finding tracks too. That's awesome.
Yeah. His manager, Rob Bolger, had some stuff. There was a lot of stuff he had re-recorded. So these weren't the original master tracks, even from Megadeth. He did some playthroughs of various Megadeth songs and stuff. But I realized, look, I don't want to, write Megadeth riffs over this stuff. I'd rather just take the, because look, if it's just a boo, just it's keeping time, it's not a copyrighted, it's not a song per se. It's just Nick playing a groove, right? So you could take that and write over it. And so it really became kind of a funny thing. Ilias Papadakis from over in Greece, we worked on some stuff. There's a track that we had Lars from Rancid and Rob from Death Angel we worked on, so there's a bunch of us because everybody was excited. It was like, hey, it's like, of course, split the publishing. We're all like in the room writing a song as if Nick were here with us, and it's his, as we know, oftentimes they, give us a groove, give us a drum track, and then we write over it. So I'm excited about that. There's another name too, Max Norman, who, he had mixed some stuff for me with the label a few years back. And, still just has those golden ears, man. I don't know. Did you get to work with Max on any stuff at all or not?
Never did this. And I've never met Max, but I know he's crushing it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So one guy that we did work together with that you've stayed in touch with is Randy Burns, who actually co-produced the Peace Cells album. He's done some mixes of some tracks for you. And it's funny, on the Kings of Thrash tour last year, I actually ran into him over in El Paso. And I haven't seen Randy. I mean, it's been 30 years, So what's your working relationship with Randy been like since Peace Cells, basically?
One day Randy called me and goes, "Chris, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Nothing." He went to Return to Metalopolis tapes and have them baked. I'm like, what? I took it to a place in Burbank, and he wanted all the tracks and stems, and he remixed Return to Metalopolis. It's almost done.
So when you say bake, what do you mean by baking the tracks?
Oh, the 2-inch tape, man, after it's been sitting for how long? 35 years or something?
Yeah.
You can't run it, or all the metal particles will just fall right off the tape. So they take it.
I did not know that. That's interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Put it in an oven, and they bake it, and you get one pass after it's baked.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy's place was crazy. He had every analog tape machine ever made. But in case you brought something in, he had the machine to transfer it. And I didn't think much of it until I started hearing what he was doing, Randy Byrne doing. And it's insane, man, how it sounds now. It sounds like, Jesus, it sounds like a Lamb of God record now. It's just like this.
That's fucking awesome. So it's funny you mentioned that about these tapes. And I don't know, Josh, you probably grew up in a digital world. Probably. Did you ever record analog?
Yeah, some of our early stuff was 2-inch tape. But yeah,
the Primer stuff, the Primer 55 stuff.
The stuff I did with Fred Corey prior to Primer.
Sure. Okay.
That was all 2-inch tape.
Yeah. So it's, it's funny. I've heard that the labels, which I assume Universal, Warner, Sony, there's like a big underground, like almost like a salt mine in the Midwest, right? Where they basically, they store them underground where it's cool and it's not exposed to the elements. So I'm sure that's where the P-Cells album sits. It's in some vault, 50 feet underground, that to just, I guess, try to, as best they can, preserve that. I mean, think about, gosh, like old Motown records and, some of those original records, right?
I think they're transferring all that stuff now while
I guess to the listeners who don't record, it would be like digitizing your family photo album, right? Take your old Kodak photos, right, and digitize them and move them over to digital. I guess that's kind of what we're talking about here. Same.
Well, I kind of want to, obviously, you guys being the original Megadeth, let's say like that. Chris was kind of joking as he and I were talking before you jumped on. You guys all kind of being drunk back in the day. But they would send you, David, to deal with people because out of all of you, you might be the nicest of all of them. And I'm like, well, that's probably that Midwest charm
that David's got. Nice.
That Minnesota nice. So just kind of looking back on those days, David, what do you remember meeting Chris? And same with Chris, what do you remember about meeting David back then?
Well, I'll say this. There was only one time that I remember being so drunk I couldn't play. And it was on my birthday. And we were in like Richmond, Virginia or something. And I remember, getting hammered before the show. We were driving around in an RV in a motorhome on some leg of the P-Cells tour. And that was the only time I got that hammered. And I took great pride in not ever being that hammered that I couldn't play. But I'm like watching my fingers like turn to the like Gumby, I'm like, I went over the line, But yeah, I mean, look, it's funny because we started the group in summer of '83. We debuted the band in San Francisco with Kerry King on guitar back in the spring of '84. And, then right after we came home from our second trip up there, our drummer, Lee Rausch, bugged off. It just was too much for him. And Kerry never left Slayer to join Megadeth. He was helping out, basically. He was a fan of Dave's, and we got on real well. So then it was kind of the retooling of the band, and there was Chris and Gar Samuelson were friends growing up, right? So they knew of a guy named Jay Jones, and he got in the mix with me and Dave, got in there, and so he brought Gar in. And Gar was just such a next level player in heavy metal. And I understood that because I as a bass player, I stepped out of rock and roll and heavy metal. I played in jazz band in high school and got educated in some other things outside of just rock. Just because as a bass player, I wanted to be better, and in rock there was kind of this box you were in, and I wanted more. I wanted to improve. So, and then I remember, I think it was how it was set up at Mars Studios over there on Melrose in Vermont. You know, I think it was kind of strategically set up that Chris would be playing down the hall, like, you know, like set up with his amp and playing. Jay Jones and Gar, I think, set this up. And then so me and David walk out of the room and, who's that guy down the hall? You know, and it was like, let's go. Who is that? Oh, it's Chris Poland. Wow, man, you play amazing. So that's some loose memory that I have of that. And, you know, something like that. Right. And then, you know, we auditioned Chris, you know, he sits in one day at rehearsal. It wasn't really probably a formal audition as much as it was kind of sitting in, and it was like, okay, this works. So it was kind of Gar and Chris were a team, and me and Dave were a team, which is fine because, you know, it kind of helps when you're coming into something. You got a buddy, you got a wingman, you know. So it was kind of Gar, Chris, and our manager, Jay Jones. The three of them knew each other. And, you know, I do remember having one very big blowout argument, one of the first ones of many probably, but talking about how we're going to split the money. And I just sat back because I was like, Gar and Chris are older than me. They can fight this argument better than me. And I just remember sitting back. It was kind of the first time we'd ever talked money. Yeah. Gar and Chris were like, hey, we were told we're getting an equal cut. We told we're getting an equal cut. And I remember Dave was getting a little wiggly because he was by himself. I mean, and I just kind of sat back and was like, yeah, I'm with them, an equal cut. You know what I mean? Because we never talked about it.
Thinking of it now, you know what? He was totally right. And if he would have just explained it, because if he would have split that money with us, somebody would have died. You know, oh yeah, here's $15,000, and you have an hour-a-day habit. You know, something would have happened. And you know, he ran the band, and it wasn't a lot of money. It was $60,000, and he was smart to hold on to it.
Yeah, and the truth of it was we basically split everything. You know, what was not up for grabs was, well, whoever writes the songs gets paid, and of course he was writing the songs, so he got that money. And of course that's a bit of a one-sided argument when you're the guy who holds the key. You know, whoever has the key has the money. Oh, by the way, I have the key. You know, but that was an argument that you know, we weren't going to win. And that, look, the truth of it is, you know, I got more involved in songwriting starting on So Far So Good, So What, you know, because it's kind of like those first two albums were pretty much written kind of together around the same time. You know, one of the things that I remember, Chris, is, you know, when our agent Andy Summers put us out on that tour in early 1986, I called it the Peace Cells pre-production tour, looking back on it now, because he sent us out before we recorded the Peace Cells album, and in a motorhome back to the Midwest and the East Coast, god awful cold. And we had to play every song that we had. I mean, you know, every Killing Is My Business, every Peace Cells song. And I just remember every night we'd be playing all this fast thrash stuff. And as soon as Gar would start hitting the kick drum, and then I'd come in with the bass. And this was this new song we had called Peace Cells, But Who's Buying? You could just tell we had a hit on our hands, right? Do you remember that feeling in the room?
He was so smart to send us out, because we went out twice that I remember before we recorded it, didn't we?
I think we did. I think we went out once at the end of 85. Remember, we did those dates it was Slayer, Megadeth. We went to L'Amour's and City Gardens. We did some dates with Motorhead and Wendy O. Williams. I mean, Andy had us working, you know, for a band that just had one album out on Combat, Killing Is My Business. And it didn't really move the needle, you know, because they were just a little independent and they didn't really do much with it. Andy, our agent, he kept us busy, man. He got us in all the right places.
I don't think it was planned, but we went from the road directly into the studio, which was totally genius. And then we had Randy Burns.
Yeah.
It was meant to be, man.
I remember when Steve Sinclair from Combat Records, he took us out to eat at Cantor's Deli on Fairfax, which was later, I've seen pictures of Guns N' Roses there. Like, I think many a record deal have been negotiated at Cantor's, right? And so they came, remember our first record, Killing, I think we had an $8,000 budget, and they came and they said, of course it was a free lunch, which, oh my God, you know, us being like we were at those days, was like a free lunch for sure. And then I remember he said, he goes, I think they gave us $25,000, you know, to do what the album that would become Peace Sells. It was like, holy cow, like that's huge money, you know? And but it really isn't when you're in rooms like the Music Grinder where we cut drums and bass. And then you and Dave went to Mad Dog Studios, I think in Venice, where you guys cut the guitar tracks, right? And vocals.
That place was okay.
Yeah. And Randy was there with you. Randy and Casey McMacken, right? Did both of those guys go with you? Yeah.
Great drum. He got really good drum recordings.
Yeah. Remember Casey McMacken? He was just sitting over there. He has a long hair. He's rocking. He's thrashing. He's got his hands on the console. He's looking over like, yeah, man, go for it. You know, he was like a member of the band, right? You know, like it was good energy.
It was like this, but really big.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was, you know, it was, those were, you know, it's funny because we could have never done, if you did a tour like that now, obviously all those songs would be all over YouTube and they'd be all over the internet.
Oh, God, yeah.
You know, yeah, you'd be screwed. But you're right. It happened in a way that it was just natural. And to, you know, let's talk about going in the studio, you know, recording Killing Is My Business, which is, I think you'd been in the band like a week or maybe a month, right? And we go right in the studio and record versus going in as a real band on Peace Sells. Do you remember some of the dynamics at play with that?
I just remembered that it was really easy to get the basic. I mean, the drum tracks were done super fast. Mm-hmm. You guys were just tight as a drum, man.
Yeah.
One thing I do remember, Scott Menzies from the very beginning was there.
Our roadie, Scott. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Remember we had the party at the Grinder. Mm-hmm. And next to me, and he goes, "Who is this band?" He's like, "Dude, I don't know what to say." He was so blown away by how it sounded. He was. So I was happy.
Well, we lost Chris. Well, we'll wait for him to come back here.
Well, it's funny. I'll ask you this, you know, kind of going back to Killing Is My Business. You know, the one track that's always kind of throwing me off is These Boots, man. What do you remember about kind of getting These Boots and like, you know, we should cover these boots for this record?
So that was our manager, Jay Jones. In fact, he brought both the covers in. These Boots was his idea for Killing, and then also I Ain't Superstitious on Peace Sells. And it's funny, I Ain't Superstitious, we did the Jeff Beck version of it rather than the original old blues version of it. So, yeah, you know, it's funny. I think, you know, talking about doing the drum tracks, I don't think Gar played to a click on any of it except maybe the first half of Peace Sells. I think that was it. Or I seem to remember the first half of Peace Sells was on a click, and after that we had to turn the click off because there was a tempo shift, and then we just, you know, vamped it out from there. But it was me, Dave, and Gar standing in a room, maybe even Chris. I forgot. We should have to ask him if he was in the room when we were recording the basic tracks.
There, he's back. Nope. Well, he was there, then he left.
Hey, I see we have a new pope. Cardinal Robert Prevost becomes the first American. We have an American pope.
Yeah, I got a call from the studio, and then it just totally jacked up my connection.
No problem. Well, in the meantime, while you were doing that, we got a new pope.
Oh, really?
That new pope has just been elected. Yeah, he's some American. We have an American pope, so who knows?
Oh,
maybe this.
Did they white smoke?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. You know, it's so funny. I was there on Palm Sunday. We were on tour over there on the Euthanasia Tour in 1995. And we had a day off. It was Palm Sunday. And I went to see whatever Pope that was. I think he was the Polish Pope at that time. And I remember going into, you know, to Vatican City. You know, he's up on the balcony talking. And I mean, talk about a big gig. I mean, that's like the stadium gig, right? I mean, the place was probably only half full and there was at least 25, 30,000 people there. It was massive.
Yeah.
And that was a cool experience, man, to go, you know, as a Protestant boy, you know, Minnesota Protestant boy, to be sitting at the Vatican City for Palm Sunday. Like, this is a pretty cool experience right here. So
there's a lot of Christians that wish they could have seen that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was pretty. It was pretty cool. Hey, while you were getting back online, I was just reminiscing. Were you? Because I remember me, Dave, and Gar were out in the big room of the Music Grinder when we were cutting the basic tracks for P-Cells. Were you out in the room with us?
No,
or you didn't do that. It was just the three of us, right? Because we were just putting down guide tracks basically to help Gar. Yeah,
to get drum tracks.
Yeah, and I seem to remember. I remember we cut the first half of P-Cells to a click. Gar was not big on a click.
Right.
Not that he couldn't play to it. He just like the more free form kind of guy. But I remember the first half we played to a click. So, because it was a pretty straight stock beat, and then we had to turn it off because there was a tempo shift, and then he just, vamped it out from there. But I seem to remember most of the other songs. I don't think we recorded those to a click. Did we?
You dropped out there. Say that again.
I don't think we recorded most of that record to a click track. Did we?
Oh, no. I mean, if you listen to The Conjuring, dude, it's a very like 20 beats per minute taking off.
Yeah, I'm speeding up. Yeah, I mean, I think like Wake Up Dead, there's way too many tempo changes. Even My Last Words, which is, again, there was just these radical tempo shifts. We didn't even really figure out how to do that until probably the Rust in Peace album. When we were in there with Mike Klink, he taught us how to, how we could, write and sort of print analog click tracks, So, hey, let's go ahead.
I think it made it exciting. Those songs that don't have a click it just brings energy to it.
Totally. Yeah. So, hey, everybody, David and Josh here, and just want to let you know about Rockabilia, our new partners here on the show, and you can visit them and enter David10 for 10% off on any of your purchases. So some cool stuff they have there, Josh.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome company. I mean, if you're of my generation of the, we go to the magazine aisle, and, when it was a print magazine, and, Rockabilia was in every Metal Edge and Metal Maniacs and whatever else, and you would circle every Megadeth t-shirt you wanted, or Metallica or Slayer or whatnot. So super pumped to have Rockabilia on with the David Ellefson show. And, just a few things. They've got over 500,000 items over at rockabilia.com, including staples like the Master of Puppets shirts, Rest in Peace shirts. They do limited edition exclusive drops each month. And the one thing that they wanted to stress was everything is 100% authentic. No bootlegs over there at rockabilia.com. So that's obviously a plus there too.
Cool. So the money goes where it's supposed to go. So, all right, excellent. All right, so check it out. Rockabilia, David 10 for 10% off. Check it out, rockabilia.com. Hey, fast forward, you came in and played on some solos on the Rust in Peace album. And we were basically a three-piece, kind of like we were on So Far So Good, So What, and you kindly came in, and of course it was a different day because back in the first two albums for us, we were all just a bunch of raging freaking drug addicts and alcoholics and crazy, and then now you got sober. In fact, before that, let's talk about this. So you can be part of the David Ellefson Bass Coalition because you actually, I said, man, Chris Poland's the best bass player in the band, man. This guy can play. You would pick up a bass and you would play some Jocko line. I was like, dude, this guy is amazing. It's like every instrument he touches is just so musical. And it's your touch, man. And you would pick up, I had a fretless bass, I remember. And I remember you'd pick it up and you'd be playing these lines right after Megadeth, you got sobered up, and Andy Summers got you the gig playing bass for the Circle Jerks.
Oh yeah,
you went out in a van, and aside from you, I remember you saying you went out in a van in a punk rock band and made more money than you ever did being in Megadeth, which is on Capitol Records. Well, what was that experience like? Just playing with a punk rock band, newly sober, playing bass. I mean, everything changed for you in that minute.
And because they gave me a really good bass rig, and Gingles, the guitar player, let me use his 62 P bass, and the rig sounded so good that it was a lot of fun, man. And the songs were good, but it was a lot of work. And I remember about the fourth week into the tour, I couldn't rest my elbows on the armrests, and because I would always sit shotgun while someone drove,
right? And
my tendons were just raging, totally raw in my elbows and going down my arm.
Yeah.
So that was taking a lot And then I had to
from playing bass, right? From just and you were playing with a pick, I assume, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I had to refret the bass because in the 6 or 7 weeks we were out, I totally thrashed all the frets were just torn to shreds, man.
Well, in a 60s bass, Chuck Rainey taught me this, that they had these very thin, small frets because they made less noise in the studio, right? When they were recording, I love a 70s bass, which has the big jumbo frets and all that. But those guys making those Lee Sklar, I guess all those cats back in the day, they loved the 60s stuff because of those smaller frets, which not so friendly for a guy like you playing punk rock on it, right?
And you know what else happened was the pickups, original pickups, we were sweating so bad on these shows, man. It was just crazy that one night the bass just stopped working.
Jeez.
And luckily I had a backup bass because it was the bass I borrowed for the audition, which was a pink BC Rich. Yeah.
Punk rock.
Yeah, it was a pink BC Rich Eagle bass. And so I was playing that. And I was so pissed that the bass broke that I just took that bass when I was at the end of the show and just threw it over my shoulders. and the next day we went and put Bartolini pickups in the P bass. Awesome.
Was it good? Really, because a Bartolini is a very different tone. In fact, when we were recording, I was trying to find a 5-string to record Hangar 18 on the Rust in Peace album. Me and Mike Klink went around to a bunch of bass shops, and the Bartolini was such a different tone than what I had, obviously, with the Jacksons, which were, I use EMGs. It's probably about as close as you can get to that. But the Bartolini is this very different tone, right? It's kind of a lot more mid-range to it. How does that work?
Sure, man. I thought it sounded a lot easier on my right hand. Yeah. But I had a big, tube SVT head. I had a JBL 15 and a horn and a mid-range cabaret cabinet. Mm-hmm. And an 810, Ampeg cabinet. Dude, it was just thundering loud with tons of snap. It was a lot of fun, man.
Hey, so, interesting thing, there's these pictures floating around. There's us in these black and white photos sitting next to our attorney, Len Krobkin, at the time. Well, the drummer of the Circle Jerks, I guess he was probably in the band with you. He's an accountant by day, right? So he had played a show somewhere, maybe Club Lingerie, under the name Megadeth. Megadeath. Right. And of course, once we signed to Capitol Records, he serves us with a cease and desist, which is basically pay me or or go away, which we did. Yeah. Obviously, we had to. We were signed to Capitol. Peace Sells is coming out or is out. Smart man, you wait to sue until the money shows up. Yeah. Once the check is cleared, then it's so we did, and we cleared that up, and that's kind of I don't think that's really very well known in any footnote of our lives or Megadeth, and gladly it was resolved and it went away, but. He did accounting work for a ton of musicians, right? That was kind of his wheelhouse, wasn't it?
Yeah, he's a great accountant, man.
Yeah. Chris was probably riding in a van that Megadeth paid for with the and that gear that he was using was all from the Megadeth payoff. So it was that full circle again, everything coming back around again.
Welcome to the music business.
Yeah. Those guys were smart, man. They were making cash, and instead of carrying the cash, they would stop at all these vintage guitar stores that they knew about all over the country, and they would buy, Keith Clark bought one of those Rickenbackers that has the light show inside it. Mm-hmm. You ever seen one of those? Exactly. You've never seen one. But, yes, he bought it for $2,000 and it was worth $5,000. And so he sticks it in the van or in the trailer. Yeah. And Greg Hetson, Gingles, buys this SG, man, and it's got one of those tremolos that's sideways.
Yeah. Okay.
It's perfect. It's immaculate. It's it's from the mid 60s, early 60s. And so he's all excited. It's dead winter. He goes, grabs the guitar. We're at a Motel 6 that night, and it's hot as hell in the room, right? He opens the case up, and right in front of everybody, the whole guitar checks.
Oh, crap.
And it just goes. And closes the case. And we're all like, dude, closing the case ain't going to help.
It's been baked.
So we let it warm up in the room, and then he looked at it and he was just like, come on, really? So sometimes.
So those guys were like basically investing as they were going, right? Buying expensive guitars and saving them. Smart,
really smart people. Yeah.
What did you do right after that?
I was the whole time I was working on Return to Metalopolis, and when I got that money together, I could I didn't have to go, because I was like remodeling kitchens and bathrooms with a guy, and I didn't have to do that anymore.
Right.
That's when I told my brother, man, I got the ideas, man. Let's make a record. And so I demoed them all out on a little Porta 5, one of those little cassette recorders.
Yep.
And then we shopped it. I think Tom Wally was my first. He got us the first deal, and then we had to go to Enigma. But
so Tom Wally was our A&R guy at Capitol Records, just to give a little history. He then left and started Interscope Records with Donnie Einer. He then was the president of Warner Brothers Records, and now I believe is the president of Loma Vista, which is the label that Ghost is on, who just had a big #1 album here in America. So yeah, Tom Wally knows how to sell records. He knows how to build artists. So wait a second. So was that Damn the Machine, or what was
that was Metalopolis.
Okay, got it. Okay, cool. Got it.
No, Damn the Machine was on A&M, and Brian signed us over there.
Yeah, so it's it's funny, out of all those things, it's like you've had this really great major label, or at least major indie career, which is pretty remarkable, right? Because especially coming from where we were in Megadeth, in our lifestyles and addictions and everything else, the fact that, because I remember when I was getting clean, I remember going down to the apartment down there in Marina Del Rey, and we were hanging out. I remember we watched Clint Eastwood produce that film about Bird.
Oh yeah.
Remember we were watching that? What was that called, about Charlie Parker, the saxophone player, who was also turned into a very bad heroin addict. And but Clint Eastwood produced that. I guess being a fan of jazz music and whatever, or he directed it, I guess. And I remember like kicking it at the apartment, watching it. I was getting clean. I wasn't quite there yet. You and Andy Summers were there. And you were clean, man. And all of a sudden I was like, fucking, hey, how about this? Chris is now the vision for you, the inspiration of like how to get it together.
Bird.
Yeah, Bird is what it was. Great film, super great film. Yeah. So no, you were a real inspiration, especially coming from our dark days together. And you were laughing and you were happy and you were out gigging and playing and making music. And I was just like, because you know how it is when you're in addiction, heroin, like where I was at, and it's just like, oh, do I even want to touch the instrument anymore? Do I even want to play? Do I even want to do this anymore? And
it's a lot of work. A lot of work to be an addict. It's a lot of work, man.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a full-time job for sure.
Yeah, but you know what? To go back to all the the labels and the music that I got to do, the only regret, I have no regrets about everything that's happened except one. I regret that Mustaine, like for years, would go on stage and call me a liar.
Mm-hmm.
I never really thought much about it.
Mm-hmm.
But then I did the math and I realized that's why things were so hard for me to try and get deals, or even get, like, I walked into Carbon one day and I thought, you know what, these guitars aren't bad. I want to talk to their A&R guy.
Right.
So I spoke to the guy and he goes, dude, we don't use people like you on our roster.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
So I'm like, oh, okay. Well, yeah. So I have a feeling that, Dave's anger with me about what was really was like a dragging around a fucking 50-pound ball all the time.
Yeah.
Back then.
Well, look, he did it to Jeff Young, some derogatory comment that kept him from getting work for a long time. I could say the same was attempted at me. You know what I mean? Fortunately, I just kept moving. I just kept going and was like, all right, I'm just going to ignore that comment and keep moving. You know what I mean? So it's, So I guess to some degree, it's interesting, isn't it? A lot of people, there's always been a lot of these former Megadeth members unite, and it's not an intentional thing. It's not. In fact, when I was going back to Megadeth, Jeff was really taking an issue over, Dave whistling or singing guitar solos to him or something. And it was a public thing. And he's like going, come on, we got to unite. And I said, hey, Jeff, I just got home from San Diego. I just rejoined Megadeth. And this was 2010, right? Yeah. And I remember Dave came to me about it. And I said, I'll handle it. I'll take care of it. And I made it go away, as I do, right? Because that's just part of the gift I've been given on this planet. It's like, we're going to come to peaceful terms. We're going to make that go away, and we're all going to just move on. You know what I mean? But
not sour grapes or anything. It's just, it finally dawned on me just how much damage that really did. Yeah. And give a shit, because, the kind of music I like to play has nothing to do with metal. So,
of course. But to be fired and then have some sort of derogatory comments made about you. I mean, look, at some level, it's, hey, can we call your former employer to get a referral? You know what I mean? Let's call it what it is, right? I would say those of us who have gone through those ranks, that's almost a guarantee that that's going to happen. Is some sort of a deflective way to, for whatever reason it is. But listen, you and me, I think, and even Jeff and others are Marty Friedman walked away. They're, members that go through the ranks. And look, people are in bands for a period and then they're not. They either quit, get fired, whatever, it doesn't work out. We move on. And I would say most of us have, even Nick, even though it took a minute because he had to come up. I had to touch on that in the movie. I had to touch about life's, days right after Megadeth and in those few years, because it was dark times for him. Oh yeah. As it can be for a lot of people. You mentioned it to me, back in 2005 when I was in, litigation, just resolving my business stuff with Dave and everything. And you were a good friend to me. You called and we had some phone time during that season. And, you said to me, it must be hard for you. It's like you grew up in a band, in a situation where everybody wanted to be a part of you. Everybody wanted to be around you. It was a cool band. It was a cool thing. And suddenly you're not in that. Like, who am I now? And you talked to me about that as a friend and a brother. So I appreciate that you were very in tune with, what is life like, just kind of being the normal guy, you know what I mean? And not being, because you went through it too. I mean, to some degree,
Difference between me and you is you're an amazing self-starter, man. It's like, you're like right now, while we're doing this, you're probably thinking, oh, if I do this over there, I'll make, probably $4 or $5 grand. So I'm going to, and I don't know how you do it, man. You have so many, like irons in the fire all the time, man. I just don't know how you do it, man.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. I guess being resourceful is one of my gifts, you know what I mean? And look, and sometimes obviously years ago, when my back was against the wall, Megadeth disbanded at its very peak. We had this huge record deal with Sanctuary, and it's like, there's a pot of gold right over here and you can't go get it now, so, but, I think also just in our worlds, as I've seen you do too, it's about being connected. The music is obviously why we do it. And that's what we want the public to hear, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of this stuff, there's publicity, promotion, but even a level below this, when the cameras aren't on, there's a whole lot of activity, where we're networking with people, we're saying yes to sessions, we're playing on records, we're jumping stage and doing events and things. And you've been great with that, Chris. You really have. It's, every time I've called, you said, hey, do you want to jump with Kings of Thrash? And look, we made that Best of the West double live album from that, which, who would have thought? It was just a gig, right? And all of a sudden it was like, hey, I bet if we call Cleopatra, I bet they'd be down. And I'd just gotten reconnected with Brian Pereira, the owner of the label, right before that, with the director Michael Sarna. So it's funny how, when people come in, and I guess for me, it's, it's a sobriety thing for sure. And it's a GOD, good orderly direction. It's like, there are no coincidences, right? When someone's in the room, there's a reason. It's like, hey, there are no more coincidences. It's all sort of kind of happening the way it's the universe, is bringing it together the way it's supposed to go. And I think for me that I just try to be aware of that. And then everything else just kind of falls into place, and then get out of the way, let the river flow, and stop trying to dam up the river and make it go the way you want.
Right.
Get out of the way, so.
Well said.
But yeah, so listen, fast forward. We have a new song that we did with Kings of Thrash called Lockdown that by the time this comes out will have just aired, will have just showed. It's funny, we had tried to write some songs. Well, we did write some songs together. And of course, one of the things that of writing songs with a singer is to try to write around the singer or to do that. And oftentimes as guitar players, as musicians, we're in our little world. And then we go, hey, can you sing over that? And they're like, I can't sing over that, or it's a challenge, right? So to Jeff Young's credit, we were on tour last year over in Europe and we're winding the tour down. And he goes, hey, maybe we should write some song. Maybe we should write some songs around Chaz's voice. It was like, now that's a novel idea. Why don't we write some stuff around the singer, right? So I just said to Chaz, I said, you know what, dude? You have really got a true thrash metal heart, man. I mean, you're really, you believe it, you live it, you're in it. It's what gets you excited about music. I said, go home and write us a couple of tunes. And so Lockdown is one of them that he brought in. And I worked with him a little bit on some of the arrangements and wrote a couple little pieces in it, but it's really his song, and he wrote the lyric. And, how timely was we were putting it together. Of course, there's a presidential change here in America. There's all kinds of, it's all getting, mucked or, not mucked up, but it's
man.
The waters, you know what I mean? Worldwide, so.
I didn't know you guys did that. That's genius. That's how it's, it should be. I mean, it's like Mustaine wrote Dystopia around his range.
Right.
It's just the thing to do, man.
100%. Yeah. Right around the singer. And so with Chaz, it was like, first of all, he writes great heavy metal riffs. He thinks, because he's such a Megadeth, Metallica, Overkill, Nuclear Assault. I mean, that's his bag, right? So I said, dude, 1984 thrash metal. Think Ride the Lightning, like just that era, and that's what he brought. So this song Lockdown really is that. And it's, I got to give it to Chaz for, as the composer of the tune. And then, it was great to have you on it. It's, what's awesome is Chaz out of the gate plays the first solo. Chaz is a great guitar player, and for him to try to find a voice in between you and Jeff Young is pretty incredible because it's, I mean, let's face it, you two are not only fantastic players, you've got your own identity, you've got your own fan bases. So it was great that when Chaz sort of demoed the solo, I go, dude, that first solo is awesome, man. I think so. Yeah, right. Man. Let's get you coming out of the gate screaming, you know what I mean? So, but I think it's great. Thank you for just being a part of it because we've got the trifecta between you, Jeff, Chaz. We've got these heavy metal Molly Hatchet going on with these three guitar players, which is fucking awesome.
I really like Jeff's the last solo. That solo is insane.
Well, and it's interesting because that sort of alludes a little bit to some of what he did on So Far So Good So What. I don't know if it's maybe In My Darkest Hour or something, this real kind of legato.
Oh, just all over the place.
Yeah. So, and obviously your stamp is just right there, and it's funny. I got to say, that's probably one of the more rock and roll solos I've heard you do, right? Because you've got a very distinctive style and phrasing to how you play. But that was probably one of the more just coming out of the gates, just kicking solos. Yeah. And then you got a couple of spots in there, but on the track, but it was, I was like, that's Chris. Holy shit, that's Chris. You know what I mean? So I thought it was cool. It was a different punch that you had on that I thought was very cool.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
Hey, one other thing too, before we wrap up here, and you've told me this story, but just talking about solos is when you were younger, you broke your finger, right? And that gave you that extra reach. I would often have to break the guitar players in after you were gone, with Jeff and
I'm breaking their fingers.
Yeah. Al Petrelli. I'd be sitting there with the guitar players working them in. And I said, listen, here's the secret sauce. Chris broke his finger. you're never going to reach that. You know what I mean? It almost sounds like a two-handed because the reach of but can you just talk a little bit about that? Just what happened, because it became a signature part of your style, you know?
Yeah. And I've been, guitar players that I really respect, like one guy, his name's Bob Robles. One day he told me, he goes, Chris, if you didn't injure your hand, you would just be some rock guy playing club. And so I came to believe that, but I'm at school, got my books, and this like, junior, freshman, whatever, knocks my books on the floor, and I'm pissed. So I'm chasing him as fast as I can. He goes in the lab. It's a big giant oak door with 9 panes of frosted glass, and the hydraulic closer is broken. And so I go through the door and he slams it, and my right hand hit the frame, the window frame, and this one went right through a window. And when it broke, he freaked out and opened the door, and then my hand was like hamburger. Yeah, man.
And so basically that did it actually sever, because it's the tip of the first finger, right? It's that finger, right?
Well, it's here's what it is.
It's like a rubber finger.
Yeah, no, it's like
a finger.
I can't bend it. And what happened was it got my pinky and it got this finger. So I can't feel these 2 fingers. Wow. But it makes, I have to play like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and if you had to play like that, you'd play different. I don't care.
Sure. Well, it's funny. I learned to play like that with the bass higher. I don't do, I guess a finger player kind of could do this more like an upright, like Robert Trujillo or somebody kind of does that, right? But as a pick player, I learned to play the bass like that up higher because of that same thing, to have that kind of C-shaped form around the neck. I don't claw hammer with my thumb over the top of the neck.
Right.
So I understand exactly what you're doing. However, just with having that extra spread, you literally can grab an extra fret or two, like those solos in Devil's Island and stuff like that. That's why. And the other thing is you bend down. You don't bend up. You don't do like the Chuck Berry, Ted Nugent, right, thing.
Oh,
right?
no, I can do both, but I love bending down.
Totally different sound. Yeah.
Yeah. I love doing it.
Yeah.
It's all Jan Hammer. I'm just trying to, when you hear stuff like that, I'm just emulating Jan Hammer. I don't even, I haven't listened to Jan Hammer in a decade, but I used to all the time.
Right. Yeah.
I want to hit on something that David brought up a minute ago. You were brought back in to Megadeth to do some solos on the Rest in Peace demos, and you leave Megadeth in a drug induced, everybody's using, and then you kind of come back during Rest in Peace where everybody's trying to sober up. What was kind of the vibe around the band when you come back around in Rest in Peace?
The vibe was this. If I had met Nick, I mean, he greeted me before I walked in the studio, and if we had gone out and had lunch, I probably would have joined. But it was Janie Hoffman that basically told me, and she kept driving it home. She said, if you join that band, you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm the first one, I don't care how sober you are. If you're around 3 other guys and somebody's toying them with a little, heroin here and there, eventually we're all going to be doing it again. It's just the way it is.
Right.
And so for as much as I thought it would have been the right thing to do, I didn't do it because I already signed a contract with, Enigma to release Metalopolis. So I was like, and then I think they told me that Marty Friedman was, next in line. And I thought to myself, well, shit, Marty's better than I am. He can go do that.
You know what's funny about that, Chris? You were upstairs soloing. Me and Dave go downstairs because remember our manager, Ron Lafitte, he had an office in that building. It was the Calico Films building or whatever. So Libman Kahane had a management floor, and they managed a lot of producers, the one guy managed George Michael, who was on top of the world at that time. And so Ron brought his business in, and he was managing Jane's Addiction, Megadeth, you know. And so you're upstairs cutting solos. Me and Dave go downstairs, and we see Marty's album sitting on Ron's desk. We're like, who's this guy? You know, and he goes, I'm telling you, this guy's been wanting an audition, you know. And me and Dave just looked at each other like, why not? The last 12 guys didn't work out, and not you, but we did. We had done a run of auditions with Nick back in about 6 months before that, and it was a bust. You know, one guy showed up and goes, he comes in and he had played in Jag Panzer. He walks in and he goes, all right, show me the songs. We're like, show you the songs. And then another guy, this guy, he was from San Diego, and he's in there doing his Blackmore thing, whipping his guitar cord against his guitar. And how we would do the auditions, this is some shitty little rehearsal place over in the valley by the Burbank airport. And, you know, Nick's back there. So Nick's the new guy, right? Me and Dave, we would play through one song, and we would just turn our wirelesses off on the back of our strap. We would turn our wirelesses off, put our guitars down, and just leave the room, and then not even say goodbye. And then Nick would have to like usher the guy out, right? Like, hey, yeah, it was brutal, man. It was bad.
You know how we used to do that when me and my brother were looking for a guitar player for Return to Metalopolis. If it didn't work out, I would say, hey man, who's hungry? and we were at
version.
We were at the Vernon place, Francisco's. Yep. And so we would just walk to where, you know, me and Dave used to walk to get food. And that's how we would get rid of everybody that wasn't working out.
In fact, yeah. So Francisco Studios is in Vernon. That's where we rehearsed, wrote most of Peace Cells there, a lot of it, including the song Peace Cells. But we also built a loft so we could live there because any one of us was homeless on any given Tuesday.
Yeah, me and Dave lived there.
Yeah, you guys lived there. Yeah, I think I may have spent a night there, and I was like, oh, yeah, this isn't for me. I'm out of here. But in fact, Steve Bauer just hit me. There was like Douglas hamburgers or something. He goes, were those really the best hamburgers? Yeah. And I guess that's where we used to walk in the rain when we were waiting for money or trying to find score drugs or whatever. Or after we scored, we went down to Douglas hamburgers because the burger always tasted better after you scored, you know, so the patty melt. But, well, listen, great memories of all this stuff. And Chris, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. And, look forward to seeing you in October at the Whiskey A Go-Go September 4th, actually, when we played Kings of Thrash. We're going to play the show there. And you and I are going to see each other in August. Comic-Con event coming up in Mohegan Sun. Yeah. Yep. And on the 7th, we're going to jump up and actually do a bass story event. So we're putting together a bass story show. My manager, Pamela, she goes, let's do a bass story. I was like, you know, that's a great idea. So we're going to just kind of do a one-off and jam through some tunes with it's a great band that I have back there, and they put things together real good and real quick. And guys from Dead by Wednesday, so that'll be a good time. So, dude, thanks for just being a great friend and an awesome musical partner, and just it's good to see you again. And we'll let you get back to work. So
you too, Dave, and thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Yeah, man.
See you guys. Bye.
All right.